She delivered the wrong order to the wrong mansion and overheard a roomful of doctors give up on a dying woman. Just a delivery girl with worn shoes, nothing more. What she didn't know, that woman was the mother of one of the richest, most powerful men in the city. And the one thing every expert had missed, she recognized in a single glance. The gates of the Walker estate were taller than Emma Carter's entire apartment building, and for a second, she just sat in her dented little car and stared at them. She checked the address on her phone again. The order was simple. 1 bag of soup, 2 sandwiches, delivered to the side entrance, leave at the door. Easy money. Except the side entrance was nowhere she could find, and the front gate had buzzed open the moment she pulled up, as if someone inside had been expecting her. Emma was 28, soft around the middle, and used to people looking at her twice for the wrong reasons. She tugged her jacket down, grabbed the food, and walked up the long stone path before she could lose her nerve. A man in a dark suit met her at the door. He barely glanced at the bag in her hands. "You're late. They're already in the East Room." I think there's a mix-up," Emma started, but the man had already turned and was walking fast down a hallway lined with paintings. He clearly expected her to follow, so she did, half jogging, the warm soup sloshing against her arm. She told herself she'd just hand off the food, find the right person and leave. Instead, the man pushed open a set of double doors and waved her through, and Emma found herself standing at the back of a large, bright room full of people in white coats. In the center of it all, propped up in a wheelchair near the windows, sat a frail elderly woman. Nobody noticed Emma. The doctors were too busy talking over each other. "The tremors are worse this week," one said, flipping through a thick folder. "Heart rate's irregular again. We've adjusted the medication 3 times this month." "It's the nerves," another said. "Degenerative. We've run every test." "Every test twice," a third muttered. The old woman in the wheelchair said nothing. She just stared out the window with tired, watery eyes, the way a person looks when they've stopped hoping anyone is going to fix anything. Her hands shook in her lap. Her skin had a strange yellow-gray color that Emma recognized instantly, the way you recognize a smell from childhood before you can even name it. Emma's breath caught. She knew that color. She knew those shaking hands and that gray tiredness. She had watched it for 2 whole years in her own grandmother, back home in a tiny kitchen that smelled of mint tea. Before she could stop herself, the soup bag slipped lower in her grip and she took a step forward. "Excuse me," she said. The room went quiet. A dozen heads turned. The man in the suit by the door looked horrified, suddenly realizing she was not whoever he'd thought she was. A tall man near the window stepped forward. He had sharp eyes and the kind of stillness that made everyone around him go careful. This, Emma would learn, was Ryan Walker, the woman's son, a man whose name people in the city said quietly. "Who are you?" he asked, not unkindly, just precise. "I'm the food delivery," Emma said, holding up the bag like proof. Her face went hot. "I got lost. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to walk in on." She stopped. Her eyes went back to the old woman. The words came out before her sense could catch them. "Has anyone checked what she's been taking?" "Not the medicine. The other things. The natural things." One of the doctors laughed, short and cold. "Thank you, miss. We have it handled." But Ryan held up one hand, and the laughter stopped. "What do you mean?" he said slowly. "The other things." Emma swallowed. Every instinct told her to put the bag down and run, that she was a nobody in a room full of experts, that she'd already embarrassed herself. But she thought of her grandmother, the gray skin, the shaking hands, the long years no doctor could explain. "My grandmother looked exactly like that," Emma said. "The color, the shaking, the tiredness that never goes away. They told us it was a dozen different diseases, heart, nerves, everything." She took a breath. It wasn't any of those. It was something simple, something she was taking every single day that everyone thought was helping her. The old woman in the wheelchair turned her head. For the first time, she was looking directly at Emma. Her tired eyes had sharpened just slightly. "What was it?" the woman asked, in a voice like dry paper. Emma opened her mouth, then closed it. The truth was, she couldn't remember the exact name. It had been years. The notebooks were in a box under her bed. "I don't remember," she admitted, "but I have her journals." She wrote everything down. Every day, What she ate, what she took, how she felt. When she finally got better, she figured out the cause herself. It's all written there. The cold doctor scoffed again. With respect, Mr. Walker, this woman delivers sandwiches. Emma's cheeks burned. She set the bag of food gently on a side table, gathered what was left of her dignity, and turned to go. But as she reached the door, the old woman's voice followed her across the room, soft but clear. "Bring me the journals, child." Emma froze. Ryan Walker was staring at her now with an expression she couldn't read. Behind her, the doctors had gone silent again, and for the first time that day, none of them looked quite so sure of themselves. Emma's apartment in Yonkers was small enough that she could touch both walls of the hallway at the same time. That night, she didn't turn on the television or heat up dinner. She got down on her knees beside her bed and pulled out the cardboard box she hadn't opened in 3 years. The smell hit her first. Old paper, faint mint, and something flowery that her grandmother used to dab behind her ears. Emma had to sit back for a moment and breathe through the ache in her chest. She had been 25 when Grandma Rose passed, and she had packed this box in a hurry, too sad to look at any of it properly. Inside were the journals, 6 of them, spiral notebooks with soft worn covers, each one filled cover to cover in Rose's slanted handwriting. Her grandmother had been a careful woman. After years of doctors shrugging at her symptoms, Rose had started keeping records of her own. Every morning she wrote down what she ate, what she drank, how she slept, and how her body felt. She used to say that if the experts wouldn't pay attention, she'd have to do it herself. Emma pulled the lamp closer and started reading. The early pages were hard. Rose described the same things Emma had seen in that bright room at the estate. The shaking hands, the exhaustion that no amount of rest could fix, the strange gray-yellow tint to her skin that frightened the neighbors. There were entries where Rose wrote that she felt like she was disappearing a little more each week. Emma turned the pages slowly, hunting for the part she half remembered. The part where everything changed. It took 2 hours. Her eyes were burning by the time she found it, deep in the 4th notebook. "Stopped taking the daily tonic this week," Rose had written. "The one the herbalist swore by. The one I've had every morning for years. My hands are quieter already. Strange." Emma's heart began to thud. She read on, faster now. Over the following weeks, Rose's entries shifted. The shaking eased. Her color came back. The tiredness lifted like fog burning off a field, and running through every page was a growing, furious wonder. "All this time," Rose wrote near the end, "all this time it was the thing I trusted most. The thing I took to feel better was the thing tearing me down. No doctor ever asked about it, because it wasn't medicine. It was just my little daily habit. Harmless," everyone said. Harmless. Emma sat very still on the floor of her tiny apartment. She thought about the old woman in the wheelchair, Margaret Walker, with her shaking hands and her gray skin and her tired eyes that had stopped hoping. She thought about the doctors talking over each other, naming disease after disease, adjusting the medicine again and again, never once asking the simple question. Then she found the second thing. A few pages later, Rose had taped a small folded label into the journal. It was torn from the bottle of the tonic she'd been taking. The brand name had faded, but one line was still readable, written in tiny print along the edge. "Contains concentrated root extract. Not recommended for continuous long-term use." Underneath it, in her own hand, Rose had scrawled a single bitter sentence. Nobody reads the small print until it's almost too late. Emma pressed her hand to her mouth. She remembered now, sitting in that room and hearing one doctor mention the supplements Margaret took. He had said it the way you mention something that doesn't matter. A natural thing, a daily habit. Something to help the older woman feel calm and strong. Nobody had looked twice at it, because it wasn't a prescription and it wasn't a treatment. It was just part of who Margaret was. But Emma had heard the exact same dismissal her whole childhood. Every time a doctor waved away her grandmother's little morning ritual. She got up, knees stiff, and looked at the journals spread across her bed. There was a difference, though, and it sat heavy on her. Her grandmother had been one woman in a small kitchen. Margaret Walker lived behind iron gates and a wall of specialists who got paid more for one afternoon than Emma made in a year. They had laughed at her today. The cold one had said it out loud. This woman delivers sandwiches. She could just stay home. Forget the whole thing. Eat her cold dinner and drive her route tomorrow and let the rich people sort out their own problems. But she kept seeing Margaret's eyes when they had sharpened on her. Bring me the journals, child. That woman was running out of time, and somewhere under all those experts and all that money, she had heard something true in what Emma said. Emma sat on the edge of the bed and carefully gathered the 6 notebooks into a neat stack. She wrapped them in a clean dish towel, like they were something precious, because they were. She didn't have the gate code. She didn't have a phone number. She had no idea how a person was even supposed to reach a man like Ryan Walker. But she had the truth, written in her grandmother's hand, taped and dated, and proven across hundreds of pages. And tomorrow, somehow, she was going to find a way to put it in front of the people who needed to read it. For the first time in a long while, Emma Carter felt something other than tired. She felt like she mattered. Emma got to the Walker estate just after 9 the next morning, the journals wrapped in their dish towel on the passenger seat. This time the gate did not buzz open. She pressed the intercom button. A flat voice answered. Yes? Hi, I was here yesterday. I have something for Mrs. Walker. She asked me to bring it. The journals? A pause. Then the same flat voice. There's no delivery scheduled. Please move your vehicle from the entrance. No, I'm not delivering food. My name's Emma Carter. Mr. Walker spoke to me. Mrs. Walker asked me to come back. I promise. Ma'am, this is private property. Move along, please. The intercom clicked off. Emma sat there with her hands on the wheel. She pressed the button twice more. Nothing. A camera above the gate stared down at her like a dark eye. And after a minute, a security car rolled slowly into view on the other side of the bars, just sitting there, watching, waiting for her to leave. She left. She didn't trust herself to drive far, so she pulled into the first place she saw. A little coffee shop a half-mile down the road with a faded green awning. She ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu and took a seat by the window, the journals on the table in front of her, and tried not to cry into her cup. She had been so sure. She had stayed up half the night reading, and it had taken one bored voice on a speaker to shut the whole thing down. You look like the world just ended. Emma glanced up. A woman stood beside her table holding a paper cup, maybe 50 sharp gray bob reading glasses pushed up into her hair. She had the brisk, tidy look of someone who ran other people's lives for a living. Sorry, Emma said. Long morning. The woman's eyes dropped to the stack of notebooks, then came back up. Those look well loved. They were my grandmother's. Emma managed a small smile. I was trying to get them to someone. It didn't work out. The woman tilted her head, studying her with sudden interest. You're the delivery girl. From yesterday. Emma froze. How do you? Because the whole house has been talking about you since last night. The woman pulled out the chair across from her and sat without asking. I'm Linda. I've worked for Margaret Walker for 19 years. I manage her schedule, her appointments, her household. Everything except her health, which, as you saw, is managed by a great many people who cost a great deal and have accomplished a great deal of nothing. Emma's mouth opened slightly. You're her assistant. I'm her assistant, her friend, and the only person in that house who isn't paid to agree with the doctors. Linda took a slow sip of her coffee. Margaret asked about you twice this morning. She wanted to know if the girl with the journals had come back. The guards turned you away on standing orders. They don't know who's important and who isn't, so they treat everyone like nobody. Something loosened in Emma's chest. She really asked about me? She did. Linda set her cup down. Now, you said something yesterday that put a crack in a wall I've been hitting my head against for years. So I'm going to ask you plainly, and I'd like a plain answer. What exactly do you think is wrong with her? Emma took a breath, and then she told her everything. She told her about Rose, the gray skin, the shaking hands, the years of doctors naming one disease after another. She opened the 4th journal to the marked page and turned it so Linda could read it. The entry about stopping the daily tonic, the weeks of slow recovery, the torn label taped to the paper, not recommended for continuous long-term use. Linda read it without speaking. She read it twice. When she finally looked up, her face had changed. The polite skepticism was gone. There's a supplement, Linda said quietly. An herbal thing. Margaret's taken it every morning for as long as I've worked for her. Longer. It came from a wellness practitioner she trusted decades ago, before any of these specialists. Every doctor who's come through has left it alone because it's not a drug. It's just her morning routine. Harmless. She said the last word the way you'd handle something that had just turned over in your hand and shown teeth. Emma leaned forward. That's exactly what they always said about my grandmother's tonic. Right up until she stopped taking it and got better. Linda was quiet for a long moment, turning the coffee cup slowly between her fingers. I want to be honest with you, she said at last. I've watched a parade of brilliant people fail that woman for years. I've stopped believing in answers. So part of me thinks you're a kind girl who lost her grandmother and sees her ghost in my employer. She held up a hand before Emma could protest. But the other part of me has read this journal, and it's describing my boss detail for detail. And no expensive man in a white coat has ever once described her this well. She closed the notebook gently and pushed it back across the table. I can't get you through that gate. Ryan controls the household, and right now he's somewhere between curious and convinced you're a con artist. She stood, smoothing her jacket, but I have access to Margaret's records, her routine, her supplement schedule. Things even the doctors don't bother to look at. A flicker of something fierce crossed her face. I'm going to look into this quietly. Every bottle, every date. And if what I find matches what's in these pages, I will walk it into Ryan Walker's office myself. She paused at the edge of the table. Don't disappear, Emma Carter. I have a feeling I'm going to need you again very soon. Linda started that same afternoon. The medical wing of the Walker estate took up the entire east side of the ground floor. It had its own filing room, a wall of locked cabinets, and a computer system the specialist used to log every dose and every reading. Linda had a key to all of it, because for 19 years, she'd been the one who scheduled the appointments and ordered the supplies. The doctors barely registered her presence. To them, she was furniture. That suited her fine. She began with the supply room. Shelves of neatly labeled boxes, prescription bottles, vitamins, the whole machinery of keeping one frail woman alive. She moved past the medicines that came and went, the ones swapped out every few months as one specialist replaced another's failed idea. What she was looking for was the thing that never changed. She found it on the bottom shelf where it had always sat. A squat amber bottle with a handwritten label, refilled from the same small supplier for as long as anyone could remember. Margaret's morning tonic. Linda had handed it to her 1,000 mornings without a single thought. She picked it up and turned it slowly in the light, reading the faded print along the bottom, the part nobody ever read. Her stomach tightened. Linda took the bottle to the filing room and started pulling records. She wanted to build a timeline, the kind no single doctor had ever bothered to make, because each one only ever saw the slice of years they were present for. It took her most of the night. She laid the years out across the long table, one folder per period, each one belonging to a different specialist or clinic. And as the pattern came together under the lamp, her hands grew cold. Margaret's medicines had changed constantly. Heart medication, then nerve medication, then something for the tremors, then something for the fatigue. Each one tried for a while and abandoned when it didn't help. Doctor after doctor, theory after theory, all of it shuffling and rotating like cards. But the tonic never moved. It appeared in the very first record, decades old. It appeared in last week's chart. Every single doctor's notes mentioned it once. In passing, always the same way. Patient takes daily herbal supplement, long-standing, continue as tolerated, continue, continue, continue. Nobody questioned it because it had been there before they arrived, so they assumed someone smarter had already cleared it. It was inherited, Linda realized. Each doctor trusted the one before, and the very first person who started Margaret on it had never been a doctor at all. She matched the dates against the symptom logs. The worst stretches of Margaret's illness lined up with the times the tonic was being refilled more often. There had been a period 8 years back when Margaret briefly stopped taking it during a long hospital stay for an unrelated fall. The notes from those weeks were ordinary, almost boring. Patient unusually alert. Tremors reduced, color improved. And then she'd come home, the morning routine resumed, and within a month the decline started again. A new doctor was hired, a new disease was named. Linda sat back in the hard chair and pressed her fingers to her eyes. 19 years. She had carried that bottle up the stairs herself. More mornings than she could count, smiling, telling Margaret it would help her feel strong. By the time the sun came up, she had everything in a single folder. The timeline, the symptom logs, the hospital stay where Margaret had unknowingly gotten better, the faded warning on the label. She didn't have proof, not the kind a laboratory gives you, but she had a pattern so clean it made her sick to look at. She took it straight to Ryan. He was in his study, already dressed, already on the phone. He held up one finger without looking at her, finished his call and set the phone down. "Linda, it's early. I need 10 minutes, she said, and put the folder on his desk. He listened the way he listened to everything, still and sharp. But she saw the exact moment his patience thinned. "An herbal supplement," he repeated flatly. "Linda, the best doctors in the country have examined my mother for years. You're telling me they all missed a vitamin bottle because a sandwich courier had a feeling. I'm telling you they all missed it because they all assumed someone else had checked it." Linda tapped the timeline. "Look at the dates, Ryan. Not the words. The dates. The one thing that never changed in 20 years is the one thing nobody ever tested. And the only time she got better was the one stretch she happened to stop taking it. Read it yourself." He didn't pick up the folder. He looked at her with the cool expression he used on people trying to sell him things. "I appreciate your loyalty. I do. But I'm not going to upend my mother's care because of a coincidence and a stranger off the street." Linda nodded slowly. She had expected this. She gathered the folder, then paused with it in her hands. "You know what bothers me most," she said quietly. "It isn't that the girl might be right. It's that not one of us ever asked the question. 20 years, and the only person who looked at your mother and asked what she was taking every day was a delivery girl who saw it once." She set the folder back on his desk. "I'll leave this here. You don't have to do anything with it." She walked out. Ryan didn't touch the folder for an hour. He took 2 more calls, answered emails, tried to put it out of his mind. But the dates wouldn't leave him alone. That clean, ugly little pattern. The single quiet stretch where his mother had, for a few weeks, come back to herself. By noon, he had the folder open in front of him, and he was reading every page. Ryan called Emma himself. She was 3 deliveries into her shift when an unknown number lit up her phone. She almost didn't answer. When she did, the voice on the other end was clipped and direct, and it took her a full second to place it. "Miss Carter, this is Ryan Walker. I've read the journals my mother's assistant compiled, alongside her medical timeline. I have questions, and I'd prefer to ask them in person." A pause. "I've arranged independent testing through a research facility in Boston. I'd like you there when I explain why." Emma pulled her car to the curb. "You want me to come to Boston? A car will collect you tomorrow morning. You'll be compensated for your time and your missed work." Another pause, shorter. "My mother asked for you specifically. I'm told she's stubborn about it." Emma looked at the journals on her passenger seat, the dish towel still wrapped around them. "I'll come," she said. The research center sat on the edge of the city, all glass and quiet hallways, and people in pale blue coats who didn't laugh at anyone. Emma had never been anywhere that smelled so clean. She kept her hands folded in her lap and tried not to feel like she'd wandered into the wrong life. They put her in a conference room with a long table. Linda was already there, and she gave Emma a small nod that steadied her more than anything else could have. Ryan stood by the window with 2 researchers, a man and a woman, both older, both listening to him with the careful attention people gave a man like him. When everyone sat, the woman researcher folded her hands and looked at Emma. "Mr. Walker tells us you were the first to suspect the supplement. We'd like to hear your reasoning, in your own words. Take your time." Emma's mouth went dry. Every eye in the room was on her, and she was suddenly aware of her cheap shoes and her uniform polo under her jacket. But she had told this story to Linda once already, and she had lived it long before that, so she breathed and she began. She told them about Rose. About the 2 years of watching her grandmother fade, while doctor after doctor named a different illness. About the gray skin and the shaking hands and the tiredness that no sleep could touch. She slid the fourth journal across the table, opened to the marked page, and let them read Rose's own words about the week she stopped the tonic and felt her hands go quiet for the first time in years. My grandmother figured it out herself, Emma said, because she was the only one writing everything down. The doctors only ever saw her for an hour. They never saw every morning the same thing. She looked up. When I walked into that room and saw Mrs. Walker, it wasn't a guess. It was like looking at a photograph I'd already seen. The exact same picture. The man researcher leaned forward. And you didn't know what the supplement contained? No, sir. I just knew the shape of it. The way something that's supposed to help can be the thing hurting you, and nobody checks it because everyone trusts it. She glanced at Ryan. I'm not a doctor. I deliver food. I know how that sounds. But I watched this happen to someone I loved, and I couldn't sit there and watch it happen to someone else. The room was quiet for a moment. The woman researcher picked up the journal and studied Rose's handwriting, the dates, the taped label. Then she set it down and nodded slowly. Mr. Walker has provided us with a sealed sample of your mother's tonic. We'll be running a full analysis on its compounds and how they accumulate in the body over long-term use. She looked at Emma, and there was something almost gentle in it. I'll tell you honestly, the substances in these traditional preparations are rarely studied for what they do over 20 years of daily use. Nobody funds that. So if your grandmother was right, she found something the science simply never looked at. How long will the tests take? Ryan asked. Several days. We won't guess. We'll know. Ryan nodded once, the muscle in his jaw tight. As the meeting broke up, he caught Emma near the door. Up close, away from the bright room and the crowd of doctors, he looked tired in a way she hadn't noticed before. The way a man looks when he's been bracing for bad news for so long he's forgotten what hope feels like. Why did you come back? He asked quietly. After my guards turned you away, you had every reason to forget the whole thing. Emma thought about it. Because somebody turned my grandmother away too for 2 years. Everybody had a reason not to listen. She shrugged. I didn't want to be one more person who had a reason. Ryan studied her for a long moment. Whatever he'd expected her to say, it wasn't that. Something in his expression shifted, just slightly. The cool distance giving way to something more uncertain. My mother's the only family I have, he said. I built everything I have to keep her safe. And I might have been poisoning her every single morning with my own money, paying men in white coats to tell me it was fine. His voice was flat, but his hands weren't quite steady. If you're right, Miss Carter, I owe you more than a car ride. If I'm right, Emma said softly, I just want her to get better. That's all my grandmother ever wanted for somebody too. The days that followed were the longest Emma could remember. She went back to her route. She delivered sandwiches and soup. And every hour she checked her phone, waiting for the call from Boston that would tell her whether 20 years of trust had been the very thing killing Margaret Walker. The call came on the 5th day. Emma was halfway up a stranger's driveway with a bag of takeout when her phone buzzed. Linda's name. She set the bag on the step, knocked and answered as she walked back to her car. Emma. Linda's voice was strange, tight. Are you somewhere you can sit down? Emma's heart dropped. What is it? What did they find? The results are in. Ryan wants you here when they explain everything. A car's already on its way to you. A pause. You need to hear this from the doctors, not from me. But Emma, Linda's voice cracked just slightly. You weren't wrong. You weren't anywhere close to wrong. By the time Emma reached the estate, the bright East Room was full again. The same specialists who had laughed at her sat around the long table, except none of them were laughing now. The woman researcher from Boston had driven down personally, a thick report in front of her. Margaret was there in her wheelchair, Linda at her side. Ryan stood at the head of the table with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. When Emma walked in, every head turned, the same as that first day. But the room felt different now. The mockery was gone. In its place was something closer to shame. The researcher waited for Emma to sit, then began. We ran a full analysis on the tonic, she said. On its own, the main ingredient is a root extract that's been used in traditional remedies for centuries. In small amounts taken now and then, it's mild and mostly harmless. That's why it has the reputation it does. That's why nobody worried. She turned a page, but this preparation is concentrated, and Mrs. Walker has taken it every single morning, without a break, for over 20 years. What we found is that the compound doesn't leave the body cleanly, it builds. Slowly, over years, it accumulates in the tissues and begins to interfere with the nervous system, the heart rhythm, the way the body processes everything else. She looked up. The result is a set of symptoms that imitate several serious illnesses at once. Tremors, irregular heartbeat, chronic fatigue, the gray coloring in the skin, even the cognitive fog. A heavy silence settled over the room. In other words, the researcher said carefully, for 2 decades, Mrs. Walker has been treated for diseases she never had. The tonic created a moving target. Every doctor saw real symptoms and named a real disease because the symptoms were real. They just had one shared cause that nobody traced back because it wasn't on any medication list. It was on a kitchen shelf. One of the specialists, the cold one who had called Emma a sandwich courier, spoke up, his voice low. We tested for everything. We tested for things this rare 100 times over. You tested for diseases. The researcher said, not unkindly. You never tested the supplement because it wasn't yours to question. Each of you inherited it from the doctor before you, and that doctor inherited it too. The trail goes back to a wellness practitioner none of you ever met. She closed the folder. It's the most honest mistake in medicine. Everyone assumed someone else had already checked. Emma felt strangely numb. She had believed it. She had staked everything on believing it. But hearing it confirmed by a room full of experts, hearing that her grandmother had been right twice over, was almost too big to hold. Then came the twist none of them saw arriving. The researcher hesitated, then turned another page. There's one more thing. Something we only caught because we cross-checked the supplier records Linda provided. She looked at Margaret directly. Mrs. Walker, the tonic you've been taking for the last 6 years isn't the same formula you started on. Margaret frowned. It's the same bottle, the same supplier. My late husband arranged it before he passed. The supplier changed hands 6 years ago, the researcher said gently. The new owners increased the concentration of the active root to make the product, in their words, more potent, more effective. They thought they were improving it. They had no idea anyone was taking it daily for decades. She let that sit, which is why your decline accelerated so sharply over the last several years, despite the most aggressive treatment. It wasn't the disease getting worse, it was the dose getting stronger. The room went utterly still. It was Linda who broke first, her hand flying to her mouth. 6 years. 6 years of watching Margaret slip faster, of new specialists and new theories and a son spending fortunes to fight an enemy that didn't exist. And the whole time, someone she'd never met had quietly doubled the poison, believing they were doing good. Ryan had gone very pale. He uncrossed his arms slowly. So the harder we fought, he said, the sicker she got, because the thing we never touched was the thing getting worse. Yes, the researcher said simply. Margaret reached over and took Emma's hand. Her grip was weak, her fingers trembling, but her eyes were clear and fixed on the young woman beside her. You walked into a room full of clever people, Margaret said softly, and you were the only one who saw me. Emma's throat closed. She couldn't speak. Ryan stepped forward and addressed the specialists in a voice that left no room for argument. Stop the tonic today. This minute. I want my mother's entire treatment plan rebuilt from nothing, under proper supervision, starting with the assumption that everything we believed for 20 years was built on a single wrong foundation. He turned to the researcher. What happens to her now? Now, she said, we find out who Mrs. Walker actually is when nothing is poisoning her every morning. She allowed herself a small, cautious smile. If your grandmother's recovery is any guide, Miss Carter, I'd say we have reason to hope. For the first time in years, the room held something other than dread. They moved Margaret to a rehabilitation center in Connecticut, a quiet place tucked among bare winter trees where the staff measured recovery in small, careful steps instead of grand promises. The first week was the hardest. When a body has carried something harmful for 20 years, it doesn't let go gracefully. The doctors had warned them about this. As the compound slowly worked its way out of Margaret's system, there were rough days, headaches, dizziness, a night when her hands shook worse than ever, and Ryan didn't leave her side until dawn. Emma visited that first weekend, nervous she might be intruding. She found Ryan sitting in the hallway outside his mother's room, elbows on his knees, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "They said it would get worse before it got better," he told her without looking up. "I keep thinking, what if we're wrong? What if I took away the one thing keeping her stable?" Emma sat down beside him. "My grandmother had the same week. She called it the storm before the quiet. She said it felt like her body was throwing out something that had overstayed." She paused. 3 weeks later, she was gardening again. Ryan turned to look at her, gardening, on her knees in the dirt, yelling at the squirrels. Emma smiled. I hadn't seen her stand on her own in 2 years. Something in Ryan's shoulders loosened. For the first time, he let himself believe it might actually be true. By the second week, the storm passed. It started small. Margaret slept through a full night without waking. Then she asked for a second helping at breakfast, something she hadn't done in longer than anyone could remember. The nurses noticed the gray tone fading from her skin, replaced little by little with real color. The tremors didn't vanish all at once, but each day they were a fraction quieter, until one morning Margaret lifted a cup of tea to her lips with one hand and didn't spill a drop. She looked at her own steady hand as if it belonged to a stranger. "Well," she said, "look at that." Linda, who had barely left her side, had to step out into the hall so Margaret wouldn't see her cry. The changes came faster after that. Margaret began walking the length of the corridor with a therapist, then without one. Her appetite came back. Her voice, which had thinned to dry paper, found its old strength. She started doing the crossword again in the mornings, complaining loudly about the clues, finishing them faster than the staff could. Most of all, she started talking, really talking. For years, the illness had wrapped a fog around her mind, and she had drifted through her own life half-present. Now the fog lifted, and the woman underneath came back, sharp and funny and full of stories nobody had heard her tell in a decade. Ryan visited every single day. Emma watched him change alongside his mother. The cool, guarded man from that first afternoon softened day by day until, one evening, she caught him laughing at one of Margaret's stories so hard he had to wipe his eyes. Emma kept visiting too, though she'd half expected to be quietly thanked and sent on her way once the experts took over. Instead, Margaret asked for her by name. The two of them would sit by the big window at the end of the hall, Margaret wrapped in a blanket, and they would talk for hours. Margaret wanted to know everything about Rose, so Emma told her about the tiny kitchen that smelled of mint tea, about the journals, and the years of doctors, and the stubborn old woman who decided to save her own life when no one else could. Margaret listened to all of it with shining eyes. "She'd be proud of you, you know," Margaret said one afternoon. "You took the worst thing that ever happened to her, and you turned it into the thing that saved me. That's not luck, child. That's love, traveling forward." Emma had to look out the window for a while after that. A friendship grew between them that surprised them both. The frail rich woman and the delivery girl with worn shoes, separated by every measure the world used to keep people apart, and not separated at all by the one that mattered. Margaret didn't see a courier. She saw the only person who had looked at her and truly seen her. One afternoon, Margaret reached over and patted the empty chair beside her. "Ryan tells me you're still driving that little car all over the county, delivering sandwiches in the cold. It's honest work," Emma said. "It is. I'd never say otherwise." Margaret studied her with those clear, sharp eyes. "But I think the world has bigger plans for a woman who can walk into a room full of experts and find the one truth they all missed. Don't you?" Emma didn't know what to say to that. She had spent so long being the person nobody listened to that she hadn't stopped to think about what it meant that, this time, someone finally had. By the end of the month, the doctors gathered to review Margaret's progress, and even the cautious ones used the word recovery without hedging it. She was not the same woman who had arrived in a wheelchair. She walked in on her own to hear the results, sat down, and folded her steady hands in her lap. "How do you feel, Mrs. Walker?" one of them asked. Margaret thought about it. "Like I've come back from somewhere very far away," she said. "And I'm in no hurry to go there again." Ryan stood at the back of the room, watching his mother, and for the first time in years, he looked like a man who had set down something unbearably heavy. But even as relief filled him, a harder question was beginning to take shape in his mind, one he couldn't let go of. How exactly had this gone wrong for so long? Ryan couldn't let it rest. His mother was well. By every measure, that should have been enough. But a question kept him awake at night, sharp as a splinter. 20 years, dozens of brilliant, expensive people. How had every one of them walked past the same simple thing? He decided to find out, not to punish anyone, but because he needed to understand how a mistake could live that long without a single person catching it. He hired a small team to gather every record from every clinic that had ever treated his mother. It took weeks. The files came in from across the country, boxes of them, decades of charts and notes and referrals. Then he flew to Chicago, where a national medical conference was being held, and asked to present the case to a panel of specialists who studied exactly this kind of failure. Emma went with him, so did Linda. Margaret had insisted, "If they're going to talk about what happened to me," she'd said, "I want my people in the room." The conference hall was nothing like the bright room at the estate. It was a wide auditorium with tiered seats, filled with doctors and researchers who had spent their lives studying why good medicine sometimes goes wrong. Ryan stood at the front with the records organized on a screen behind him, and he laid the whole story out plainly. The first doctor, 20 years ago, the one who had inherited Margaret as a patient and found the tonic already on her list, started by a wellness practitioner the family trusted. That first doctor had made a note, "Continue herbal supplement as tolerated." A small, reasonable line. He'd assumed it had been vetted before him. The second doctor read the first doctor's notes and saw that line, "Continue as tolerated." So he continued it. Why wouldn't he? A respected colleague had cleared it. The third doctor read the second's notes, and the fourth read the third's, and on, each one trusting the careful judgment of the experienced physician who came before. Nobody started from scratch. Nobody asked the oldest question. Every new specialist was handed a patient with a long history and a thick file, and the natural thing was to build on what was already there, not to tear it down to the foundation. Each of them did exactly what good doctors are trained to do, Ryan told the room. They respected the work of the people before them, and that respect, passed down hand to hand for 20 years, is the very thing that kept the mistake alive. A researcher in the front row raised her hand. "And the worsening? The records show a sharp decline in the last 6 years. Ryan nodded grimly. The supplier changed the formula, made it stronger. No one in the medical chain knew, because no one was looking at the supplement at all. It had become invisible. Furniture, part of who my mother was, rather than something done to her. A quiet murmur moved through the hall. A woman down in front stood up slowly. She was older, with silver hair, and the bearing of someone who'd seen a great deal. "I want to be sure I understand," she said. "No one was negligent. No one was careless. Every individual link in this chain behaved correctly. And yet the chain itself nearly killed your mother." "That's exactly right," Ryan said. "There's no villain in this story. That's what frightens me about it. I kept waiting to find the one bad doctor I could blame. There isn't one. There's just 20 years of reasonable people making reasonable assumptions, and not one of them stepping back to ask whether the foundation itself was sound." The silver-haired woman was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Walker, may I ask who finally broke the chain? Who asked the question?" Ryan turned and looked toward the seats where Emma sat, suddenly wishing she were anywhere else, her face going hot under the attention of 1,000 experts. "Her name is Emma Carter," he said. "She delivers food for a living. She has no medical training. She walked into the room by accident, looked at my mother for 30 seconds, and asked the one question that 2 decades of specialists never thought to ask." He paused. "Not because she was smarter than anyone here. Because she came in with no file to inherit, no assumptions to respect. She saw my mother with fresh eyes, and she recognized something she'd watched happen to her own grandmother. The silence in the hall changed. It went from professional interest to something more thoughtful, almost humbled. The woman with silver hair turned and looked back at Emma for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She began to applaud. Slowly, others joined her, until the whole auditorium of doctors was on its feet, applauding a delivery girl who had done what none of them had managed. Emma sat frozen, not knowing where to look, tears standing in her eyes. Linda squeezed her hand hard. Afterward, the case became something more than a private family tragedy. The panel asked Ryan's permission to study it, to teach it, to build it into a lesson for young doctors everywhere. A simple lesson, but one that was easy to forget. When a treatment keeps failing, go back to the very beginning and question the things everyone takes for granted. Test the assumption no one has tested. Read the small print no one reads. They called it a case of inherited certainty. The deadliest thing in medicine, one speaker said, isn't ignorance. It's a wrong answer that everyone agrees on. On the flight home, Emma stared out the window at the clouds. You changed something today, Ryan said quietly beside her. Not just for my mother, for people you'll never meet. Emma kept looking at the clouds. My grandmother always said the truth doesn't care who's holding it. A delivery girl or a doctor, it just wants out. Ryan smiled. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was, Emma said. She'd have liked you. The community center in the small upstate town was decorated with paper lanterns and folding tables of homemade food, the kind of warm, slightly chaotic event that no amount of money could buy and no fancy venue could match. It was spring now. 6 months had passed since a delivery girl had walked into the wrong room. The town was holding an evening to honor local caregivers, the nurses and homemaids and volunteers who looked after the people everyone else forgot. It was a small gathering by most standards. But Margaret Walker had asked to be there, and when Margaret asked for something these days, she got it, because she was strong enough now to be stubborn again. Emma almost didn't recognize her. The frail gray woman from the wheelchair was gone. In her place stood a sharp, upright woman in a deep blue dress, moving through the room on her own 2 feet, laughing with strangers, stealing pastries off the dessert table when she thought no one was looking. Her hands were steady, her eyes were bright. She looked, Emma thought, like someone who had been given back a life she'd already finished grieving. When Margaret spotted Emma across the room, her whole face lit up. She crossed to her, took both of Emma's hands and held on tight. There she is, Margaret said, the girl who saw me. Halfway through the evening, the organizer invited Margaret to say a few words. She made her way to the small stage, no cane, no help, and looked out at the room. Most of you don't know me, she began. I'm not from this town. But I asked to come here tonight because this evening is about caregivers, and I owe my life to a caregiver no one would ever have picked out of a crowd. She found Emma in the audience. A year ago I was dying, and the finest doctors in the country couldn't tell me why. I had given up, I'd made my peace with it. And then a young woman delivered the wrong order to the wrong house and refused to keep her mouth shut. A ripple of soft laughter moved through the room. She had no degree, no title. Nothing the world tells us makes the person worth listening to. What she had was a pair of clear eyes and the courage to use them when everyone around her told her to be quiet. Margaret's voice steadied into something fierce and full. We're so quick to decide whose voice counts. We look at a person's clothes, their job, the car they drive, and we make up our minds about what they could possibly know. I almost died of that habit. Every clever person in my life was so busy being clever that not one of them looked at me the way Emma Carter did. She paused. So tonight, when we honor the people who care for others, I want us to remember that the most important caregiver in my story wasn't a doctor at all. She was a stranger who decided I was worth the trouble. She raised her glass toward Emma, to the ones who speak up when it's easier to stay silent. The room rose to its feet. Emma sat in the middle of it all with her face burning and her eyes full, and she thought of a small kitchen that smelled of mint tea and a stubborn old woman writing in a notebook, and she understood that Rose was in this room too, somehow, in everything that had just happened. Afterward, in the cool evening air outside, Ryan found her by the steps. "I've been trying to figure out how to thank you," he said. "Money felt wrong. You'd have said no anyway." "I would have," Emma agreed. "So instead, I did something I think you'll allow." He handed her a folder. "We're starting a wellness program. Free clinics where families can bring everything. Their medicines, their supplements, the things they take every day that no one ever questions, and have someone actually look. A place to ask for a second opinion without being made to feel foolish for asking." He paused. "I named it after your grandmother, the Rose Carter Initiative." Emma opened the folder with shaking hands. There was Rose's name, printed clean and official at the top of the page. She couldn't speak for a long moment. "And there's a job in there," Ryan added quietly, "if you want it. Running the part of the program that talks to families. Real people, in their own words. You'd be good at it. You're already better at it than anyone I could hire." A faint smile. "You can keep the car, though, for sentimental reasons." Emma laughed, wet and surprised. "You want me to stop delivering sandwiches?" "I want you to do the thing you were clearly put here to do," he said, "which is to walk into rooms and see the people in them." She looked down at the folder, at her grandmother's name, at the future opening up in front of her like a door she'd never thought she'd be allowed through. Through the window behind them, she could see Margaret inside, surrounded by people, laughing, alive. A woman the world had written off, given back her years because someone had refused to look away. Emma thought about how close the whole thing had come to never happening. One wrong address, one delivery girl who could have stayed quiet, one frail woman who could have stopped hoping a single day sooner. A simple mistake had walked her through that gate, and out of that mistake had come a healed woman, a grieving man made whole, a grandmother's name carried forward into the lives of strangers, and a future Emma had never dared imagine for herself. She closed the folder and held it to her chest. "Rose would have liked that name," she said softly. "She'd have said the truth finally found somewhere to live." Behind her, the lanterns glowed warm against the spring dark, and Emma Carter